Welcome to tonight's session, an interview with John Erickson and Nathan Dahlstrom. And the odd person on this stage is me, so allow me to introduce myself. I'm David Flair from Lipscomb University. I'm a professor of homiletics and I direct the Christian Scholars Conference. The only credentials that allow me to be on this stage is that I know Nathan Dahlstrom very well, that I love children's literature, and I'm deeply interested in the sacred art of mentoring or apprenticeship in church, in the academy, and in the arts. I love children's literature. I was once an elementary ed major as an undergrad. I shocked and frightened my roommate, who was a mechanical engineering major, when he came into the room and he caught me weeping. I was sobbing, and he said, "What is the matter? What's wrong?" And I said, "Nothing." I just held up Old Yeller. Great children's literature is capable of doing many things very well, forming character being chief, in adults as well as the intended audience. I came to Lubbock, Texas in 1976 with a BA in elementary ed, but I left engaged to my second loves, Bible, ministry, and preaching. But over the last 4 decades, I've been fully employed as a husband, as a daddy, and as a grandpa, which has given me frequent read-aloud opportunities, which means, just like you, I've developed a good ear and a good eye for good literature, which, like you, has led me to embrace Wilder Good and Hank the Cowdog when they came rambling along. And that's the reason why we're here tonight. Another reason is that this is tonight's pre-session opening the Christian Scholars Conference, featuring a unique and enriching conversation between two remarkable writers, separated by a generation, but united by a common artistic discipline. John Erickson has just been inducted into the Texas Literary Hall of Fame, a high honor for a worthy recipient. Nathan Dahlstrom, from whom I have benefited beyond measure from his friendship and his gifts bestowed through his life and through his writing. The mentoring relationship that Erickson and Dahlstrom have has been life-giving for both of them, enhancing the quality of their lives and the quality of their work. And tonight I've asked both men to explore their craft and the mentoring relationship that they enjoy. In addition to being avid consumers of Hank and Wilder, we are here at an interdisciplinary conference with every kind of academic discipline represented in this room. And mentoring is a critical focus at this year's conference and in the years ahead. It's a desperate need in the academy, in church, and in the home. Healthy and productive relationships. And I am more than confident that this pre-session will benefit us all in lasting and in unexpected ways. John Erickson has written and published scores of books, more than 600 articles. He's best known as the author of Hank the Cowdog series of books and audiobooks and stage plays. His stories have won a number of awards, including the Audie and the Oppenheimer and the Wrangler and the Lamplighter, and they've been translated into a number of languages, including Chinese. Hank the Cowdog, the smelly, smart-aleck head of ranch security, gives readers a glimpse of daily life on the ranch in the West Texas Panhandle. Erickson was born in Midland, Texas, just south of here, and then at the ripe age of 3, he moved with his family to the Texas Panhandle town of Perryton. He eventually took a BA degree from the University of Texas at Austin and was 3 hours short of a degree from Harvard Divinity School. He's been married to Chris for 52 years. He's worked at as a ranch cowboy in Oklahoma and Texas, where he found a balance between hard physical labor and the intense concentrated effort of writing 4 hours every day. In his early years, John, young man, churned out novels and short stories and articles and plays and essays and book reviews, and he sent them off to publishers only to hear back with rejection slips. So in 1982, after 15 years of failure and frustration, this poor man and his wife started their own publishing company. They called it Maverick Books. in their garage in Perryton, Texas. And they produced the first Hank the Cow Dog book in the series. That was 1983. And 36 years later, he sold 9 million copies. Wow. He's appeared in thousands of schools from Fairbanks, Alaska, to the Key West in Florida, and we are honored to have him with us tonight. Please welcome John Erickson.
What? Oh.
That's a warm welcome. Nathan S.J. Dahlstrom lives and writes in Lubbock, Texas with his wife and children. He has numerous magazine credits for his writing and for his photography. He spent his life exploring the country from New Mexico to Texas to Colorado to Montana, up north to Michigan, and then out to New York. He's interested in all things outdoors and creative. He writes poetry. He hunts deer. He plants wildflowers. He breaks horses. He reads Ernest Hemingway and C.S. Lewis and Soren Kierkegaard. Dahlstrom is a poet of the first order. He's descriptive, he's honest, and he's keenly insightful. In the tradition of W.S. Merwin, of Wendell Berry, and Ted Kooser. His poetry explores the depths of geography and life and grief. The Adventures of Wild or Good, his first book series. In his writing, he draws on his experience as cowboy and his husband and his father, and as founder of the Whetstone Boys Ranch in Mountain View, Missouri. He says he continues to write these books about Wild or Good for kids who grew up in the outdoors and for kids who long for the outdoors and working and fishing and hunting and farms and ranches and mountains and prairies. He says, I think all kids want to do these things and go to these places. Please welcome Nathan Dahlstrom. So what does mentoring between two artists look like? Tonight, we'll explore what set out as a slow but deliberate apprenticeship in craft and art, something that began in the pasture on horseback with a shared love of animals and physical labor. But let's start with a sample reading from you both. First, John, let's hear from you.
I've never done this before, Doc. I'm getting nervous. I'm going to read to you from the 19th Hank story, which is called The Case of the Midnight Rustler. In this story, Slim Chance, the bachelor cowboy on this ranch, discovers that some calves are missing, and he finds tire tracks in the pasture. Obviously, somebody came into the pasture at night with a pickup pulling a stock trailer and knew how to call cattle into a portable pen, cut off the calves, loading them in the trailer, and headed for the livestock auction someplace. He wants to catch this guy. And so he's going to camp out in the pasture and see if he can get a identification of a pickup or a license number or something. And of course he takes the head of ranch security, Hank the Cow Dog, and they take a pack horse and go up so that they won't leave any tire tracks. And Slim has a little pup tent. And he pitches his tent, and along about sundown, he makes a fire of cottonwood boughs and limbs and cooks himself supper, which is fried potatoes and weenies. That's where we're going to start. It's pretty scary, so if it gets too bad, just raise your hand and we'll do something else. By this time, the sun had dropped behind the west rim of the canyon, and shadows were getting long. Slim brought out his cast iron skillet and started supper. He cooked up some bacon and used the grease to fry some potatoes and weenies. That was his supper: bacon, fried potatoes, and weenies. I watched him eat, and he even pitched me a bite or two, but to tell you the truth, I've never been crazy about weenies. Oh, they taste all right at first, but after you eat a couple of them, what you begin to notice is the garlic. Me and garlic don't get along. So it didn't bother me at all that Slim ate most of the weenies himself, and by then it was getting dark, and he went to work cleaning up the supper mess, and he left the open package of weenies sitting there on a rock. I wondered if he'd left them there for a reason, or what could this mean? I watched him as he wiped out his skillet and put things away and began fiddling with his gas lantern. He showed no interest whatsoever in the package of weenies. Obviously, he had left them out on purpose. Knowing that I had worked up an appetite and that dogs must eat, I scooched myself closer to the alleged weenies and gave them a good sniffing. And by George, they smell pretty good. But the point of this experiment was to see if Slim would snatch them away and say, "Oh, no, you don't, Pooch." He said nothing of the kind. In fact, he said nothing. He didn't notice. Or to frame it up more in line with the experiment, he had almost certainly put them there, hoping that I would help myself. I gave the weenies another sniffing. Holy smokes. Those things smell wonderful. I love weenies, always have. Give me a choice between a package of raw weenies and a package of raw steak, and I'll take the weenies every time. Especially if there's no package of steak around. What's a little garlic? Garlic is actually very good for the digestion, and some people even think it can cure a cold. I didn't have a cold, but a guy never knows. I scooched a little closer and gave Slim one last careful observation, just to make sure that this wasn't one of his famous pranks. With these cowboys, you never want to take too much for granted. That's what tombstones are made of. No, he was totally absorbed in his project of trying to light the lantern, which appeared to be giving him some trouble. Okay, there was my answer. I had submitted this deal to rigorous scientific testing, and what was I waiting for? And so it was that after completing the testing procedures, I eased my nose up to the package of just one. That's all I wanted, just a taste. A little snack that tied me over until, oh, wonderful weenie! Boy, I didn't realize just how hungry I was until I gobbled down that luscious weenie. And suddenly I realized just how hungry I was and how much I love fresh weenies, and maybe just one more. He never missed 2 weenies out of a whole package. How many weenies were in a package? 12? 24? 135? Who'd miss 2 little weenies out of a huge package of 135? A normal man couldn't possibly eat 135 weenies on one camping trip, and shouldn't. He needed more variety in his diet. More vegetables and fruit, and your other food groups. Just one more. Broccoli. That's what Slim needed in his diet. Lots of broccoli and cabbage, and you know the great thing about weenies is that they don't require a whole lot of chewing. And they also taste delicious. Yes, Slim definitely needed more broccoli in his. One weenie left. You know, once a guy has committed himself to a certain course of action, and we're talking about actions that could lead to serious consequences. Once a guy has charted his course, so to speak, it's not a bad idea to eat the map. That sounds odd, doesn't it? So let's go straight to the point. We're talking about evidence. One weenie left in a package can be interpreted as evidence, whereas no weenies in no package can be interpreted as an honest mistake. Someone misplaced the package of weenies. Forgot to put it in its proper place. It just disappeared. It happens all the time. So to avoid even the appearance of wrongdoing, which would have caused friction amongst the campers, I chose to, that is, the last weenie vanished, leaving not a trace behind. Boy, I definitely caught my limit of weenies for one night. And I wouldn't have minded giving 2 or 3 of them back, to tell you the truth. Darkness had fallen and Slim had finally gotten his lantern going, and he looked very proud of himself as he, You ever eat so many weenies at one sitting that you could hardly walk? Slim looked very proud of himself, and he stood up and yawned. And you ever wondered how it would feel to fall into a huge vat of garlic juice? Garlic everywhere. You can smell it, taste it, hear it, feel it. The only trouble with weenies is they can turn on you. Once they reach your stomach, they begin releasing a deadly, garlic toxin, which is why I've always hated stupid weenies. And why I quit eating them the last time I ate them. And if I never see another weenie again in my whole life, that'll be okay with me. Slim looked off to the southwest where lightning was twinkling in the distance. Well, pup, I don't know about you, but I've had about all the fun I can stand for one day. Let's turn in. Who knows, we may be up with cow thieves tonight. He pulled off his boots and jeans, turned off the lantern, and crawled into the tent. I staggered in behind him, curled up beside his head. And hoped that death would come sooner rather than later. Never, ever, ever would I touch another stupid. Slim sat straight up in bed. Maybe he had heard the rustlers coming. I didn't care. As far as I was concerned, they could steal the whole ranch. I smell garlic. Oh yeah, big deal. I was embalmed with garlic. I wonder if I put those weenies, Hank, you hammerhead, you ate all my camp meat, didn't you? Yes, I did. Go ahead and shoot me. You'd be doing me a big favor. He kicked me out of the tent. That was okay. I'd always wanted to die outside under the stars. I hate weenies.
There's a reason at concerts they let the really good people go last. So just so you know, I know that. Every time I hear John read, there's so many things going on there. The irony, the tension, the foreshadowing all through there. Just so much fun. That's why people keep buying them. And we're on the third generation of Hank kids reading Hank the Cowdog books, which is pretty special. It doesn't happen. I think there's actually, somebody did the research, and John just put out book 73. And I think it's the longest series ever written that's never had a ghostwriter. There's a lot of series that may have a few more books, like in the history of perhaps of literature. But John has written all 73. He's done 2 a year for 35 years, which is just an incredible accomplishment. So anyway, we'll talk more about that later. My first book, Shifting Gears, it's not funny. It's more dramatic. But I'm going to read a small piece of it. But the reason I want to read this piece is when I was writing this first book, John and I have been good friends for about 15 years. And this mentoring, one of the ways it looked was I could send him questions. I would email him and he would answer all my questions. He never read my manuscripts. So if somebody's hoping he's going to read your manuscripts, don't try that because it doesn't work. But he will answer your questions. And so he would answer all these questions and that you don't have a clue on as you're a young kid starting to write books and hopefully write something that would sell. And so my protagonist is a 12-year-old boy doing things in the outdoors. And one of the things 12-year-old boys do is about that time in life, they've heard a few bad words. And if they're raised in a Christian family or a family that doesn't use bad words, they know not to say those bad words, but those bad words are still roaming around, right? We were all 12 at some point. And so if you're going to write children's books and you don't want them to be Pollyannish, you want to write real stories with real kids. And so I wanted to just mess around with it, could there be a bad word in a children's book? And I'd read lots of books. And so I was trying to figure out how do I deal with that problem? There's not a book on, do you put, how many bad words go in something? And so I sent John an email and said, hey, I think my kid needs to say a bad word in the book. What do you think I should do? And he sent me a response back and I just put that in the book. So I'll read that. Do you know that? Did I ever tell you that?
No, you never tell me.
Okay. So I'm just going to read 2 pages, and I'll stop on John's line, which I think you'll recognize. And I think it also kind of gives, it shows the mentoring, which is what tonight's about, but it also shows just kind of the depth of what John's doing when he writes Hank the Cowdogs. Wilder Good, he's off hunting in Colorado. He's a 12-year-old boy, and he's off away from his mentor, a guy named Gail Loving. And Gail's walking up this draw, and he pushes the elk into Wilder, and Wilder sees one, and he's really nervous to actually shoot this big elk. If you've ever been hunting and you've been taught to hunt maybe the right way, you realize that killing something is a pretty big deal. And Wilder goes through all these thoughts about God and should I even kill this elk? But finally he shoots the elk, and it's a bad shot. He had taken the shot more to ease the tension than having convinced himself it was the right shot. Instead of the elation at a good hit, Wilder felt a sucker punch grow in his belly. The bull was hit. Wilder knew that, even though he hadn't seen the impact. The recoil of the .270 was still a little much for a 120-pound body, and he hadn't been able to keep his eye on the scope through the shot. He looked up quickly, though, and saw the bull hump up and run up the hill. The cows went crashing with him willy-nilly as they raced in retreat, gaining altitude. Spooked elk seemed to hit every deadfall, rock slide, and brush pile as they plowed their way towards safety. Wilder listened until they topped the ridge and the mountains went silent again. Wilder knew this was bad. He had not made a vital hit. His only real shot from that angle was the spine shot, and a solid impact there would have crippled the elk and laid him down immediately. His grandfather Good back east shot deer this way, and Wilder had seen him do it many times. Wilder glanced at where Gale had frozen and was swinging his gun into position behind some aspen saplings. He was crouched, looking at Wilder's direction, patient and alert. Once the elk had topped the ridge and spilled over, Wilder figured it was okay to move. He waited for eye contact with Gale again and stood up. When Gale saw him, he stood too, feeling and trusting that any suspense was over. They met in the green winter grass at the bottom of the drainage. "What did you shoot, pup?" Gale began. "A nice raghorn bull. I got nervous when you showed up and made a bad shot." "He's hit?" "Yes." Then Wilder swore. "I knew I shouldn't have shot. I'm sorry." Slapping his leg, he looked off. Wilder was careful to use the cowboy cussing that had crept into his language, sort of muffled, under his breath, as if Gale wouldn't notice. "Ah, quit carrying on," Gale mused, "and don't swear. Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey without using that language, and God tried to drown the human race without saying it." They both mused a second or two at the little swear word speech. Gale tickled with himself. So, when I asked John what I should do about this scene, he told me basically to have some class and maybe let the kids swear, but we don't have to hear the word. And he referred to his early training, which was Homer and the King James Bible, which the King James obviously has that word in it, but certainly not in a flippant term in the mouth of a 12-year-old boy. So that's the kind of thing that really pays off when you're writing your first book and you're trying to figure out what should go in it and what hadn't. And now we've got 6 books out, so something's in that advice has been working. So anyway.
That's a wonderful introduction to both of you. John, we start to talk about mentoring. Tell us what you thought when you first time you encountered this tall cowboy rider. Did the thought of having a lifelong relationship with him ever pop in your mind? Did you see talent? Did you see integrity? Did you see discipline? What did you see?
I was introduced to Nathan by Nathan's father, Peter Dahlstrom. He was desperate for someone to entertain his kids at Lubbock Christian School, and he invited me to come do that. And Nathan joined us for lunch, and I had no idea that Nathan had any interest in writing. What I liked about Nathan was that he was a horseman, and he had worked as a cowboy in Montana and New Mexico and West Texas, and he wanted to come up to my ranch and help us with roundups and branding. And he didn't give me a price, and I was really impressed with that. Here was a guy who did cowboy work. He was big and strong, and he worked cheap. So that's always appealed to ranchers and Church of Christ people, I think. So Nathan and his dad came up. We have a ranch that's rough. It's in the Canadian River Valley and has a lot of canyons in it. And it's hard to gather, and if you like wild country, it's really a great place to be. And Nathan responded to that place, and I like people who like to work, and that was the thing that appealed to me about Nathan. He was a strong man who liked to do manly things, and a year or so later, I decided to host a writing camp for students from Patrick Henry College. It's a Christian school in Virginia. I'd been invited up there, and I was impressed by the place. I'd never particularly wanted to teach writing, but I was willing to do it for 10 Patrick Henry College kids. But I needed somebody to help me with all the grubby details that I didn't want to do, such as read their manuscripts. And so I asked Nathan if he would come and help me be the camp manager. And he did, and I talked about writing under the chinaberry trees during the morning hours, and I would talk for a couple of hours. And Nathan, I noticed he was taking notes, but it never occurred to me that he was interested in writing. And until he had started writing his Wilder Good series and started asking me for advice and suggestions. So it was kind of a surprise to me that Nathan was a writer. I don't know that I would have liked him as well if I'd known he was a writer.
Well, reverse that, Nathan. What did you think when you first saw this older man, cowboy writer?
Well, we met just a few streets over at Lubbock. They're at Lubbock Christian, and I grew up reading the Hank the Cowdogs. So I'd never heard him read, and so at the fundraiser that night, he read, and it was something about dogs throwing up and burping and all these hilarious things, and so I'd always wanted to write, I guess. So I was intrigued, and then when he said, he needed cowboys. Most cowboys want a cowboy all day long, but they have to take some other job. And I was one of those guys who wanted to cowboy but had some other job. And so any chance to cowboy on a big ranch with somebody that was kind of legendary in the field was a big deal.
What did you see in him as a person?
Well, I didn't know him very well. I knew he was a Christian. And I knew he had been with his wife for 40 years at that point, and I knew he had raised kids, and so those were all, some of the cowboys I grew up with can be really good men in the saddle, but can be rough as well. And I knew John was somebody that had both sides, that he was rough and could handle all those things in the wild, but then he was also somebody who had some commitment to God and to his wife and to his children. And so I guess I was attracted to that.
Give us an example of that, a specific.
Well, whenever you go in somebody's home, the whole mentoring piece, I can give you a book and you can read it, but I haven't mentored you. Whenever I went in John's home, I saw how he lived, how he slept, how he ate, his wife. you see that whole piece, and it's almost a little bit like, walking with disciples. When you let somebody really into your life, you see the whole package, and there's not any lies there. I've seen John in good times and bad times, and I've shared the motel room and the bunkhouse and gotten up at 5 o'clock in the morning and stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning. I've seen all those areas, and that's really sharing a chunk of your life with somebody. But I knew I could trust him too, because I sent him my first little writing piece somewhere around that time. And this is one of my favorite stories. And I sent him, it wasn't Wild and Good, but I sent him this first story on an email, and I was ready for him to crown me the next Ernest Hemingway. And he was going to email me back and say, you've accomplished in 30 days what most of us haven't accomplished in 50 years. You are a little genius, and step into your birthright. And what he emailed me back was, he said, well, your story was pretty good for a couple sentences. And he said, and then you took it to the pasture and shot it between the eyes. And so I knew I could trust him. And so really I guess that's where the mentoring really started. Because when you hear that as a young artist, you can say, well, shut up, you don't know anything. You don't recognize my genius. Or you can say, I guess I should listen to the guy that sold 9 million books and go back to work, and so I guess that's probably where it started.
Oh, very good, very good. Well, John, did you have, Nathan's referenced you in relationship as an older writer and mentor. You struggled for a while, but did you have literary mentors in your life?
To a limited extent. I was friends with Elmer Kelton, the novelist from San Angelo, and John Graves, who was a wonderful essayist from Glen Rose, Texas. And but I spent very little time with those guys. I never worked cattle with them, and I was never in Elmer Kelton's house. I met his wife at writers' conventions and signed a bunch of Hank books for his grandchildren, but I didn't know him that well. And John Graves was a very private man. I barged in on his privacy one time and spent the night on his couch. I think he was mad about that for years. But I understand writers who want to follow a hermit's existence. That's what I do. And it took a little persuasion to draw me out of my canyon and get me here, but Nathan is a persuasive fellow, and I'm glad to be back in this part of Lubbock. But I never had the kind of opportunity that Nathan had. Now, I was mentored by cowboys, but I just never fit in to the world of writing. I had to go my own direction. My instincts that were instilled in me by Christian parents at the age of 5 or 3 or whatever it is could not make sense of the publishing world that I saw, or the entertainment world later, the movies and television. And so I pretty much had to learn on my own. That's why it took me 15 years to learn how to write simple sentences that I probably could have written at the age of 4. But 6 years of higher education had not improved my ability to write. At the University of Texas, we didn't want anyone to understand what we were writing. If they understood everything we were saying, they would think we were not very smart. And that was, it sounds funny, but that was, I think that's actually a description of a lot of the way students were during the 60s. And I had to unlearn a lot of bad habits and learn how to write simple declarative sentences. And I didn't have anybody to teach me. I just had to do it on my own. And I can't tell you how many manuscripts are festering in the Perryton City dump.
You two look a lot alike. You know, you're tall, drinks of water. You're
Yeah, but I'm handsome.
in a way. But you look alike. You're a lot alike. I mean, I can see the terrific similarities. But over time, you've discovered differences between yourselves. I don't know what that is, but once you've discovered those distinctions that are different, how has that impacted your relationship, the mentor-mentee relationship? So it's easy, it seems to me, or relatively smooth to be following somebody alike. But when there's differences, how does that work? Nathan, start with you. What's a distinctive here that's different, and how's that been navigated as a mentee?
John has two sons, and both good men. The son I'm closest to is Mark, and he's, I think, 36. I'm 43. So a lot of this mentoring has gone on with Mark there. Mark got a degree at Texas Tech Law. He was down here in Lubbock for a while. And so, when I think about disagreements, I think about times John and Mark and I stayed up on the porch till 2 o'clock. And I don't know, we were probably yelling at each other about something. But there were disagreements, I guess, but just really in the intellectual sense. We would argue about a good movie or a good book or who we read or who we didn't read. As far as all the big questions, of our faith and what our expectations were as cowboys, or how we saw the world, or toward our wives, I guess those were pretty similar. So I don't have anything great on any differences. John will eat raw hamburger whenever he's prepping the hamburgers for the grill because he raised it, and I don't do that. So, so that's probably the only one.
Yeah.
Well, Nathan and I, as you say, are very similar, and he can be obnoxious sometimes, but he married the greatest gal in the whole world, and I forgive him for all his blunders and failings. Missy makes up for any shortcomings that Nathan has. And he just forgot to say the same about me and Chris.
Yeah, the same is true for Chris. How many years have you and Chris been married?
51.
51.
Well, hard work, hospitality, food. Do you have a particular story, either one of you, that would want to touch on any one of those points in your relationship? Hospitality, hard work, or food? How's that worked out?
Well, I think that food is a commodity that should get a lot more respect than it does, because so many of the good times that we've had, not only with the Dahlstroms but with other people, have been in Chris's kitchen. Before our house burned in the fire of 2017, she had finally been able to design a kitchen that was exactly what she wanted a kitchen to be. She had lots of space. She had a Viking cook stove with 2 ovens in it, and she had a great big refrigerator and a great big pantry, and she used those tools very well. And when people came to visit, we usually were in the kitchen while she was preparing the food. And it's really odd that our times and culture have picked the preparation of food as to be a synonym for slavery, or a job that is unworthy of someone with class and culture, because it's one of the most important jobs any of us have. I mean, should we believe that preparing income tax or drawing up contracts for the oil and gas business is more important than being the center of a home and providing nourishment to people you love? You know, one thing I never learned at the University of Texas or Harvard University, I figured it out on my own, was that I was not in the writing business, I was in the nourishment business. It's my job to nourish spirits. And I don't think anybody at the University of Texas had any idea of what that meant. I learned it by watching my mother and my wife prepare food for people they loved, nourishing their bodies and their souls in the process. So, if I give advice to young writers, and I don't do that very often, but one is that follow the same standards that a tamale salesman would follow. If you make your customers sick, then you're not good.
Nathan, do you have kind of a theological, not on the tamale thing, but on food and mentoring and nourishing and all?
That tamale salesman deal, though, you know, I've heard that for 15 years in different ways, but it goes back to that Wilder Good book that I first wrote. And if I write a book and I make a kid think it's cool to say a cuss word, then I haven't made them better. I haven't nourished them. And that's something Hollywood isn't taking very serious now. They can have great car crashes and great superhero movies, but are they nourishing the children? And so that's something that John has taught me pretty carefully. And so when you write books for children, you know, that's a great privilege. Roald Dahl said that anybody can write an adult novel, but it takes someone really special to write a kid's novel, because that becomes a part of their childhood. You know, and I've got 2 of my students here, Tyler Carey and Grace Anderson over there. And I need to realize when this goes out to Barnes & Noble or to Amazon that it's not going out to just anonymous people of the internet, but it's going out to somebody's kids. And they may read it 10 times or 15 times. You can look in any library. I'm compiling a set of photographs of the Hank section in libraries all over Texas. But go look at the Hank section in any library. And guess what those books look like? They've got Kool-Aid, they're rounded about here, they've got all types of stains all over, because those books have become a part of somebody's childhood, which is with you your whole life. It's not a novel you read at 45 and put down and go somewhere else. And so I guess John impressed that on me pretty carefully, that if you want to shoot for this high goal of writing for children, you need to take it pretty carefully. It's not just about making some money or getting your name in a magazine, but you're writing for kids, and it's the nourishment business, and so we should consider that. And that goes back to Chris. It goes back to our wives. Something John has said many times is he gets all these awards and he gets invited places, and Chris doesn't get any of the awards. She doesn't get any of the recognition, but she's the one that's been nourishing him all these years. She's been cooking those meals. She's been providing this compost heap of nourishment for John. And so it's both ways. It's not John, the famous writer, and Chris, the wife nobody knows. It's John and Chris. I mean, really, a team that nourish each other and work together and both have different jobs just as equal. Man, that's not the kind of thing you get in the typical writing manual. That's going to stick to my ribs as long as I write, so it's been pretty important.
Very good. Now, you guys have been mentor, mentee, and then there's a friendship that's developed, obviously. How do you guys distinguish between, there's a mentor and then there's a friend. How do you see the difference? What do you think?
Well, I really don't think much, I don't think of myself as much as a teacher as I think Nathan might be aware of my being a teacher. I didn't apply for the job. And I really don't want to be a teacher. And I prefer not to talk about the mechanics of writing. In most cases, I don't care whether you know what I'm doing or not. And I don't care if you know how much agony I went through to give your kids and your grandkids decent books. The important thing is the sparkle in the eyes of the children. And you don't need to know where it comes from. If you're curious, we might talk about it, and it gets theological very quickly. But I think of Nathan and Missy and their family as very close friends and almost family. And when that fire went through our ranch, it burned our home of 25 years, my writing office, my entire library, all my letters from authors, my folks, grandparents, and our guest house where the Dahlstroms used to stay, and 90% of our pasture. And the next day, Nathan heard about it. I wanted to be alone. I didn't want to be around anybody. I didn't know how I felt. I didn't know what we needed. And Nathan called. He didn't ask what we needed. He said, "Boss, I'm really sorry. I'm on my way, whether you want me or not." And that was exactly the right call. We did need him badly. I didn't know that. I wouldn't have asked, and I really didn't want to see anybody, but that's kind of guy he is. And when we lost our granddaughter, she was 2 months after the fire. She stepped into the path of a train in Canadian, and she was a wonderful, delightful 13-year-old, and the Dahlstroms were there at her funeral and were a great comfort. So I think the important thing in a mentoring relationship is the same thing that's important in a marriage, in a business relationship, and that is you got to be honest. You can't lie, and you got to follow the 10 Commandments. That's kind of the basic guide, and if you do that, then things seem to work out better than if you don't.
The advice is when you meet an old mentor and he says, "I didn't apply for the job, and I don't care if you know how I do it or not," he's prime. That's the guy you want to start talking to. That's the guy you start asking questions to, because that's where you get the good stuff. So I've been real lucky. There's an old, I think it comes from Buddha, not that I'm quoting Buddha here, but there's an old saying that is in a million kung fu movies, and it says, when the apprentice is ready, the master will appear. Has anybody ever heard that? You could probably say it sounds a lot like Sermon on the Mount, ask, seek, and knock. And when you're ready to really learn and get rid of all the pretense and all the wanting to have your little trophy and told you're so smart, when you're really ready to learn at something, there's probably a mentor that's ready to teach you. But I don't know, you've really got to be ready to learn. And luckily our paths crossed when I was ready to learn. And it's been a blast.
Wow. What a delight, what an insight that has been provided for us tonight. Gosh, this has been good. Thank you, John Erickson, for coming all the way down from Perryton, Texas. Nathan, thanks for coming across the street. Thank you for the work that you've done. You have been a blessing to thousands and will continue to be. Thank you for opening up tonight to us. I think we've gotten some terrific insight into humanity and what the whole mentoring relationship looks like, ought to look like. Thank you for who you are. Let's give them our sign of our gratitude. It's been a remarkable gift to us. Nathan and John are going to be signing books. I encourage you to load up before you leave. Mentoring will be a focus for us at this conference, at the Randolph Luncheon, and in other settings as well. We've long claimed that we're a family of scholars at this conference, and there's good reason for that quality, and there are ways for that to continue, and we've received an insight into how that might happen tonight. Good night.